Welcome back. The federal fall fiscal update was relatively light on immediate spending, but it still paints a picture of debt that is growing more expensive. Here's a look by the numbers. The big ticket item on affordability is a $15 billion program for low-cost loans to build rental apartments, but that won't kick in for 2 years. There are a scattering of measures adding up to $168 million aimed at affordability, including a review of cell roaming fees, of bank charges for insufficient funds, and removing the GST from psychotherapy and counseling. A new Canadian mortgage charter will ask banks to accommodate mortgage holders up for renewal by working with them in advance, extending amortizations to make mortgages more affordable, and by removing the stress test for renewers who want to switch banks, though it is all voluntary on the part of the institutions. And the government hopes to increase rental supply by cracking down on Airbnb and other short-term rentals by removing some tax benefits. In a bigger picture but slightly vague way, a review of rules that keep Canadian pensions from investing more heavily in Canada, including a 30% cap on ownership of a firm, plus a look at Crown Corps, BDC, EDC, and their risk appetites, presumably to get them to spend more. But the deficit, while the same as the government predicted last March at $40 billion, is set to rise more steeply in the years ahead from its previous estimates. And debt service charges are rising sharply along with interest rates to $46.5 billion this year. In the out year of this forecast, 28-29, they're predicted to be $60 billion a year, making it one of the larger line items for the government. While the fiscal update gave a nod to affordability, did it actually do much? And will the rising costs of its debt choke off the government's ability to meet any new economic challenges? Kevin Carmichael is economics columnist and editor-at-large for The Logic. Kevin, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Amanda.
So the government is in a tough place because on the one hand, of course, they need to sort of show some restraint. And on the other hand, there are affordability issues. What do you think about the line that this update walked?
I think they walked it pretty well. I mean, look, there are people out there that would have liked to have seen Chrystia Freeland be more aggressive when it comes to spending. And obviously, less spending would take some pressure off the Bank of Canada to keep interest rates high, given what all that spending growth is doing to into inflationary pressures. She at least restrained spending, is kind of leveled off at least. That pleased Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem to a certain extent. He commented on the budget the day after, saying, the spending plan as laid out should be helpful in his efforts to restrain spending. So that was good. And I think you saw an acknowledgement there that the government realizes that it's maxed out the credit card. No big effort to do much about the balance right away. But you can see that constraint, the constraint of debt, is maybe forcing the government to be more creative around coming up with some policy answers to the many things that we're trying to do at the moment, rather than trying to spend its way through all these problems.
Yeah, and just on this front of kind of where we are headed, we know interest rates are likely to kind of stay where they are before they come down materially. So debt charges will be high. How concerned are you that we may see an economic event like a recession or something else we can't foresee, and the government doesn't really have the fiscal capacity to help the way it normally would? Or do you feel like, as they seem to, we're going to skirt a recession and actually skate through this?
I think the government's in a position where it's got its fingers crossed. It's going to help it. It's decided, I guess, as much as anything, that it will, or the odds are in its favor that it can sort of skirt through this. Not going to make the situation any worse, but as you note, not doing anything to set itself up to anticipate another event. I mean, look, as far as I'm concerned, my own opinion, I guess, would lean toward dealing with the next crisis that comes along. There's a lot to deal with right now. The world is changing quite dramatically in real time. The government's facing all kinds of things that we wouldn't even have considered a few years ago. One thing that doesn't get talked about quite enough probably is the kind of money that the government has a moral obligation to give to Indigenous communities as the reconciliation efforts ramp up. We're talking tens of billions of dollars there. That's not a big part of the discussion right now, but it's something the government has to do. We've got wars in Europe and the Middle East, hopefully not Asia, but lots of people worry that can happen. The government's going to have to step up to do that sort of thing. So, I guess, given all that, Amanda, maybe just pulling back on the reins a little bit is the best you expect at a time like this.
Fair enough. Only a few seconds here, Kevin, but when you think ahead to that spring budget, do you think that this is a signal that we'll get a pretty restrained one, or might things change and we go back to kind of big ideas?
I think it'll be restraint, and the thing to judge the government on when the budget comes around is just how much movement they make on some of these creative policy ideas that we referenced. I mean, you mentioned the talk of trying to get more of the capital and the pension funds into the economy. It'd be interesting to see how far they actually move on conversations like that. So
good to have you, Kevin. Appreciate your time.
Anytime, Amanda.
Kevin Carmichael, economics columnist and editor-at-large for The Logic. Well, fiscal management is one piece of the equation for government. Growth, of course, is the other. So is the fiscal update pro-growth? And are there hints of things to come in a spring budget? Philip Cross is a senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute and former chief economic analyst at StatsCan. Great to have you with us, Philip.
Thanks for having me back, Amanda.
So this is an update. It's not even a mini budget. The finance minister wanted us to be reminded yesterday. But there are things that do hint at growth policies here. In general, do you think this is a pro-growth kind of a document and a set of policies?
Oh, no, it's the exact opposite of what I would regard as a pro-growth document. A pro-growth document would encourage entrepreneurship, innovation, investment, all the things that Canada's been chronically lacking over the last 10 years. Instead, this government continues to rely on to think about economic growth as something that's generated by government policies. The best example is in housing. The government last year in its budget had over 100 references to affordable and affordability. They had all kinds of initiatives in housing, and what did it give us? The largest increase in rent price inflation we've seen. So the idea that a hodgepodge of government policies is going to give us a quick fix to these underlying problems is the wrong way to think. We need to think in terms of not getting government more involved in sectors such as housing. We want them less involved.
And of course, you've written and done some pretty important research on the culture in this country around entrepreneurship. And there's some pretty startlingly bad data on how many entrepreneurs kind of have dropped off post-pandemic in Canada. We just aren't seeing even the startups we used to see. From the point of view of policies that would foster it, what do you think you'd like to see? And maybe you could argue to see it in the spring budget. But what do you want to change that tone a little bit around the culture?
The tone around the culture, I think, in this country is so bad that I don't think it's something that policy alone can address. We have to get our political leaders talking to our business leaders and telling them that they're valued, that we need their contribution, that they're as fundamentally important going forward in this country as our education and healthcare workers. Our political leaders don't have any problems talking to teachers and nurses about how valuable their contribution is, but you never hear them talking to businesses about how critical their contribution is. And until we get that kind of conversation going, I don't think that a little change to a regulation here or a new policy there is going to make a big difference. We have to relearn how to talk to businesses in this country.
If anything, it's got worse, right, Philip? Because businesses have been an easy target for inflationary pressure. Rightly or wrongly, they've become the kind of the enemy here, if you will, politically speaking. Do you think that will reverse as inflation abates?
I certainly hope so. I mean, the idea that it's just farcical to think that we had little or no inflation in this country for 30 years, and suddenly businesses in the energy sector and the food sector got greedy and forced prices up. It's ridiculous. What changed over the last year or two when inflation took off was we had the most stimulative combination of monetary and fiscal policies we've ever seen in this country, surpassing anything we've seen during a major world war. So, it's hard to understand how that idea got started in this country. But as inflation backs off, hopefully people will realize the problem is not that, or the solution is not that firms become less greedy. It's that governments stop this relentless stimulus that is bidding prices up in an economy that's essentially at full employment.
So good to have you, Philip. Got to leave it there. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Philip Cross, senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute, former chief economic analyst at StatsCan. Coming up, rising food costs puts the spotlight on how we think about food as a basic human right. That's still ahead. But first, it may be the beginning of the end for self-checkout at stores. Introduced as a way to increase efficiency and even customer experience, The technology had a way of slowing things down as customers struggled to figure it out, and also increased theft as they walked out with goods without paying. Just another example of a new technology meeting a wall of human resistance. Think of Apple's Newton or the Segway. So, good riddance self-checkout. We'd say you're in good company, but we can't. Back after this.